So we left off in our discussions on correlation research and how we want to design our research, a very important function for the research to really answer the questions that we're looking to try and find the answers to. We talked about necessary cause, where again that there are certain variables or conditions that must be present for the effect to follow. Keep in mind that we talked about social science. We're trying to measure and explain cause and effect, and there are certain things that are necessary conditions for these effects to occur. A sufficient cause, again, will guarantee the effect in question. An example that we gave, the author providing the text, was again that being a female is a necessary cause of being pregnant. Thankfully, you cannot get pregnant unless you're a female. Not taking the exam is a sufficient cause of failing it, even though there are other ways of failing, such as randomly answering questions, for example. And when we talk about, social science, it's really important to understand that we look at aggregates versus individuals. It's always when you see a concept written in italics, that's something that you want to study closely in preparing for the midterm exam. I'm sorry, preparing for any pop quiz that may come up. We do not have a midterm exam. We do not have a midterm exam, but we will have a pop quiz. We're into February now, so again, I'll give you a hint. It will not be today, but you should know that it's coming soon. So please make sure that you get up to speed with the reading. Even if you're a little bit behind, you're not terribly behind right now, but you want to get up to speed as quickly as possible. And as you read, if there are things that you don't understand as well, we definitely want to use this time in office hours to enhance our understanding. But keep in mind, again, for most of your research, again, for all of your research, we're looking at aggregates, not individuals. Aggregates, not individuals. Individuals, so like we will look at, an individual single parent, individual female single parent versus an individual male single parent. But to make broad conclusions that being a single parent is different by gender, it's experienced differently by gender. We need to look at the entire group. We can't just base it off of looking at a few isolated individuals. There are times where we can make assessments based upon case studies and things and the like, but for the most part, we're looking at groups, organizations, and broader social interactions. So again, all of your research is looking at aggregates. These aggregates, though, consist of individuals. So again, some of you are looking at individuals that make under 35,000. You're not going to look at one person. But do keep in mind that even your aggregates are made up of individuals. That a way of thinking about it is that, again, if I'm an individual who's making less than $35,000, what is that? How unlikely does that make it where I may feel depressed or suicidal, more specifically? If I'm an individual male single parent, how will that impact my children's educational development? Other times you may want to look at like the gang member examples, as opposed to a question where how does being an individual in a gang make you more likely to do prison time? We may look at what are the different norms between the Bloods and the Crips. So we're exploring the relationship of these two groups. Again, family. So again, Diamond, you're looking at female-headed single-parent households versus male-headed single-parent households. Other unit of analysis can be organizations where you may want to look at what are the cultural norms of if you worked at Google or if you worked at Amazon. Many people do this. This is how, for example, we learn, again, all of this is trying to learn and get more information about, social phenomena. So we may wonder how, what makes Amazon, so successful is it their culture. We may need to look at that scientifically, and there have been, groups that have done things like that. Looking at the way that sexism plays out in corporate environments, for example. That if you give a survey to like, corporate leadership, is there any sexism at your company? No. And even if you ask some of the victims of it, you still want to be able to look at larger patterns that go beyond just their subjective experience. Many research studies, and again, look through your text. They give you a lot of different examples in this regard of ways that you can think about setting up your research, where people, again, have looked at colleges, college students, blue collar and white collar industries. Social interactions. So people may look at like, when you're talking on the telephone, I know people don't talk on the phone as much these days. Do men and women like, interact differently? Like, do women doodle more? Are men like, playing video games or something like that? People will go and study dances. So like you go to like an 8th grade dance and you just observe and you kind of like, so let me ask you all this. If you went to an 8th grade dance and you try to study it scientifically, obviously, like, depending upon, the class, meaning an economic class, the race, the religious background of the school, there may be some differences, but you all have been to 8th grade dances before. Describe for me like some social patterns that you think you might see no matter whether, no matter the background of the participants. What are some things that you normally will see in these environments? No wrong answers here, but, just as a way of thinking about how we might study these things. What are some patterns that you may have observed there? And Jania's coming off surgery, so she can't bail y'all out today. I need y'all to,
Dancing, having a conversation.
Okay, what's unique about a dance? Like, because you can have a conversation like anywhere. So in a social, what is unique about that setting that might be different? We're having a conversation right now, but we're not in a dance. So let's like really think critically about these kind of things, something that might be unique to this space. I'll give you one. People probably are usually more dressed up than normal, right? So that's one thing that we might see. That again, they may have a conversation elsewhere, but an 8th grade dance or something like that, people are probably like, going to be dressed up more than they would on a normal school day. What are some other things that might occur in such a setting? A
Getting
social,
their hair did.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I don't know if this right, but you be seeing a lot of females, getting their hair did, and
Good,
guys, get their haircuts.
excellent, good, good. So it's a special occasion. I'm worried about, how other people may perceive me. So, my hair may have been looking a certain way all week, but before this dance, I'm going to get that tight. Good. Like, so I think, again, that holds true in almost any culture, any background. Other things like, probably like the girls are probably, particularly at that age, are a lot more like engaged in dancing and stuff like that. The boys oftentimes might be clicking off, trying to look cool. Not all, but, again, more normalized, at that age. When people do dance, again, like sometimes, whether it be in 1950, whether it be in 1990, whether it be in 2020, some little 8th graders might try and dance a little bit too closely. So it all as often as some teacher coming around like, hey, back this up a little bit. So just those kind of things where we observe, like, how people interact in different settings. And a lot of times it's things like, it's a difficult question because even though we've been to dances, we take a lot of our everyday experiences for granted because we aren't looking at them scientifically. Good. Janiyah had mentioned the attire. Good. So just again, like, when you're thinking about these kind of things in your own research, and just as human beings, try and look at the normal things that you experience normally in a way like you're an outsider. That's what we try and do in social science. So even like, again, if you've grown up in like, a female single parent household, you may have a sense of, based upon your experience, what that looks like for everybody. And that certain things are just normally done. I would challenge you to really like, look at your own experiences like an outsider, and you'll see just how abnormal some of the things that we do are, even in the midst of like, repeating a lot of social norms, such as going to a school dance. A social artifact is any product of a social being or their behavior. We usually think of artifacts more in line of like archaeology and things like this. And artifacts are one of the things that kind of teach us about a culture. So we know, for example, like hieroglyphics and the pyramids and things like that, and unks. These are artifacts that, like, come from like ancient Egypt. That if God forbid there were like a terrible, like, tragedy here today in America, there might be some of the products that tell you about our culture. Our cars would be buried underground, all of our computers, our phones. And if people were to come and unearth this 1,000 years from now, these artifacts would tell a lot about how we lived. We want to, again, like, avoid faulty reasoning. That in many ways, the whole purpose and focus of this class is centered around this concept, Nashai, of avoiding faulty reasoning, where we want to not make broad conclusions off of limited and small pieces of information. So again, we see this as Black people quite often. That we believe that because somebody belongs to a certain group, and again, keep in mind what we talked about before, groups and individuals, that because somebody belongs to a certain group, that we can make certain conclusions about them. That because you're Black, I remember, like, when a few years back, I can say this now, there's been some statute of limitations, but like a colleague of mine, like a Black colleague, a white colleague had made a comment about this person. It's like, well, hey, I don't know if they can do this because they're a single mother. The colleague actually wasn't a single mother. Like, she was very married, had like a huge rock on her finger. I'm pretty sure that I feel confident this person had actually met her husband. But because she was a Black woman, because she belonged to the group of Black women, it was assumed that she had to be a single mother. I put Dr. Rounds here in this example where, because he's white, and most of the people who voted for Trump were overwhelmingly white, and white male in particular, there was an assumption that, hey, since Dr. Rounds, you're a white male, that you voted for you voted for Donald Trump. He did not. So we got to be very careful about this. Again, human beings do this all the time. We've all had this done to us, and yet we do it to each other routinely. You got to be bougie if you AKA. I don't know her, but she's AKA, so she must be bougie. Maybe she is. Because he's an athlete, he must not be very smart. Because he's Asian, he must be good at math. Again, that's short-sighted and lazy thinking. As scientists, we want to avoid these kind of things. Nobody has this done to them more than Black people. I would really encourage you to avoid doing this yourself. Now, again, there are absolutely some tried and true social patterns. Most white men are rapists. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Most rapists are white men, statistically speaking. Most people that are convicted of the crime of rape and not convicted of the crime of rape are white men. The vast majority of white men never rape anybody. So again, we want to be very careful with our speaking. It can be like, again, the mistake I just made is easy to make. As scientists, again, that's why, like, in your questions and hypotheses, I'm asking you to be very specific with your wording and how you phrase things. This is important. Now, again, when we talk about research design, and keep this in mind for your own research, there are many different ways that we can set this up. So a cross-sectional study, and as always, when you see something written in italics, make sure that you begin to study this closely and preparing for any pop quiz that may be coming up on Thursday, or the Thursday after that, or the Tuesday after that. Who knows? Stay ready. And again, please use the book to help you understand your research better. Like one of the things it'll really help you all with as you have to start to look at these abstracts and formulate your annotated bibliography. It'll really help you to understand some of the things that you're, reading more carefully. Additionally, you're going to have a method summary that's due soon, shortly after the annotated bibliography. And you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of, how to lay that out. So we're beginning to do that here. And there are different type of cross-sectional studies. Most are surveys, but we can do cross-sectional experiments as well. And again, right, look, in social science, we're trying to study cause and effect. In science, we're trying to study cause and effect. But with cross-sectional studies, we can study this effect across different periods of time. So let's look at it this way. So presidential approval ratings, and make sure, again, do not only try and look at the notes. Make sure that you're listening to what's being said as well. So a presidential approval rating. So we're going to ask every month, every couple of weeks, Latasia, until Joe Biden leaves the White House, the simple question to Americans. So again, this is a routine survey that's going to be asked all the time. Do you approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing? Yes or no? Do you approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing? So right now, here in February 2021, 66% of people roughly approve. But they're going to ask again over time, they're going to ask again in March, going to ask again in April, ask again in May. So this is a cross-sectional study, Datasia, that allows us to be able to see where people, again, like across time, feel about, the job he's doing. Some of you, Janiyah, if you were to do this with your research, you might look at the depression rate across time, of people making under $35,000, or people more, and again, make sure y'all hear me, were people more depressed, in April, then did you see any kind of change in May? Did you see any kind of change in June? Historically, people are, human beings just in general are much more depressed in December. What was the rate of those groups, at that time? The final example, the example here. So one of my students in a previous class, and again, like I said, social science research, it doesn't have to be anything highbrow, abuse or suicide or things of that nature, as much as we want to learn about those things. It can be any scientific cause and effect that you're interested in. So one of my students in a previous class, her research question was, what factors do men really love these hoes? This premise, this is based off the premise, Devisia, of Snoop Dogg's famous line, many years ago, probably before many of y'all were born. But hey, we don't love these hoes, quote unquote. Let's be very clear that a hoe can absolutely be like a woman or a man. But so in this case, she wanted to know this about, the men in particular. So her hypothesis, Deidre, was that in spite of what men say, because again, what men verbalize, and keep this in mind with research, we're trying to get at truth. And oftentimes, Diamond, what people say is not necessarily in line with truth. So people will say, well, hey, I want the girl next door. I want a good girl, a wholesome woman. That's oftentimes what men say, right? This student did not really believe that was true. In her observation, Deja, she has saw that actually, no, these dudes really do be loving, these hoes and everything. So she wanted to do some research to find out the extent that this was true at Allen. Now, here's where we get into research methods and research design. Y'all with me? So her research question is simple. She wanted to find out, are these men at Allen holes? Now, like again, I'm going to get some input from y'all in a moment of how she might go about this. But when we're talking, if she wanted to look at this in a cross-sectional way, she might look at it like, okay, look, let me ask these men in August when they first get on campus and everybody's, just like, hot to trot, if you will. Do like when it gets cold and like people be trying to like, get booed up and stuff, Latasia, do they love the hoes less? So maybe she might ask over time. But let me ask you all this again. What's her research question? Tell me this first of all. What is her research question?
Do men really love these hoes?
Good. Her hypothesis is yes, they do. They may say, I'm gonna give these dudes at Allen a survey. You're like, no, I don't love these hoes. Of course not. How could she study whether or not this is true? How could she find out if this is true without just taking their word for it? No wrong answers here, but listen to your classmates, because this is how we set up our research. How do we go about finding out what's true? So how would she find out? No wrong answers.
Don't she have to ask like the females or like deeper questions rather than like I don't know.
You're on the right track. That's on the right track. So she could potentially. So you're saying she could interview the dudes and get a little bit more information than a survey could get. Okay, good. So she could interview you. She could interview. Can we see her? Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, Janaya, she ended up having she didn't see the research through to completion. Unfortunately, we were both very disappointed. She ended up doing a whole nother topic. But at this point in the class, this is what she was doing. I hope that she picks it up for her dissertation research. But good. So she could interview and ask the men, because again, like we know that surveys can give you a little bit of information, but sometimes we have a conversation when we're face to face. Maybe we can get a little bit more. What are some other ways that we might be able to get this information? Again, we're trying to find out if these men at Allen really are hoes, really love hoes, even though they be saying that they don't. How else can we find out? No wrong answers. Put on y'all thinking caps, man. Don't be lazy with me.
She can observe the activity, like how many people they observe what they be doing.
Good.
Often they talk to that one person.
Good, Devisha. Good. So you can observe. Where might we observe? Where might be the best place to observe this kind of thing and kind of see? Very good, Devisha. Where might we go? Again, no wrong answers.
Dorms.
Okay, the dorms. Good. So, okay. Good. So Janai said go to parties. Very good. So observing them in class might not be the best outlet. You might be able to learn some things in class, but I agree with y'all. Like dorms and parties and different campus events, that might be the best way to observe their behavior. Any other thoughts on how we might try to find out if these dudes really do love these hoes? Good. So keep these things in mind of the things that you all talked about so far. We're going to specify these in terms of the terms that they're framed as in social sciences, but you all have already identified some methods, and the methods you observe, the methods you all spoke to are how we get information in almost any context. What do we see? What questions do we ask to get certain information? Is there any kind of past data on this that we might be able to study? Is there any written documentation that these men may have utilized that we could review to try and see their true behavior? No, we're not talking about hearsay at all. I don't think you did. Spell it wrong. And no worries anyway. But yeah, but no, you're right. So hearsay again, yes. So with these things, Janai, we have to be a lot more deliberate and scientific in terms of how we're going to set it up. It's okay for us to say we're going to interview and observe, but that in itself is not science. You're absolutely right. So what we're going to talk about and what you're going to have to talk about, you all are going to have to talk about in much more detail soon, is how do we go about, setting these projects up to make sure we're getting actual scientific information and not hearsay or faulty reasoning. So again, we talked about cross-sectional studies. That we're trying to find out one thing, but situations change. So we can also do longitudinal studies. And again, so as opposed to like a generic cross-sectional study, where it may be like over a year or something like that, longitudinal usually like, a lot more extensive. But there are three types of longitudinal studies. It can be really easy to mix these up, so please study them closely. I'll leave these up for a minute so that you get them here. Look at the examples. Again, using that same research question, do men love these hoes? We're setting up this single research question, Janaya, under 3 different models, under a trend study, a cohort study, and under a panel study. And again, keep this in mind, even for when you get to grad school and stuff like that. The topic that you research should be something that's interesting and fun to you. Now, again, like I said, I wish you would have carried through with this research. I was curious to see how it was going to turn out. I was defending the brothers, Deja. I did not believe that these men really love these hoes. They wanted good girls, so they it's going to bring home the mama. That's what I believe. Not that there's anything wrong with being a hoe. Don't get me wrong. Some of my best friends are hoes. Trend studies is a study in which a given characteristic of some population is monitored over time. So we might want to, again, there are different social phenomena that we might want to say, like, okay, are things so different now in 2020 than they were in 2010 and they were in the year 2000? So perhaps we might, so in this case, she might begin, Janaya, with the class of 1999 and conduct research to try and find out if these men love these hoes. She may come back to Allen in 2009 and study and go through this research again and see if she's found anything different. And then we'll study in 2019. And if she saw any kind of noticeable differences there, she might be like, hey, the men love the hoes way more now today than they did 20 years ago. Here's some of the factors why. And again, we joke about it in a situation like this, but it can be serious things like the rate of autism has gone up in this period of time, and we want to be able to know why. The rate of domestic abuse, so one of the things, Shania, we've seen domestic abuse is going up during COVID. So we want to be able to explain these things why. So again, we want to see how things have changed over time to be able to make some conclusions. And again, if we can get this information, it can help us head off some things bad things that may happen in 2029 if we know these things now. A cohort study, again, is where you're studying a specific subpopulation or cohort. So in the trend study, Deja, you're studying different groups. The class of 1999 is a different group from the class of 2009, is different from the class of 2019. A cohort study might be something where we ask the class of 2020, Nashaya, 2021, a series of questions, and we study this same class, every 5-10 years. So we give you, okay, what you doing now? Okay, what you doing now? Okay, how many kids you got? Okay, how many, so we keep up with this cohort to just kind of see how they develop. And we're like, hey, the 2021 cohort, like, 80% of them, like, are making $100,000 a year, like, 10 years after graduation, like 10% of them, like, are divorcees, those kind of things. Obviously, it would depend upon the specific information that you might want to find out. We see this, for example, like with recidivists, people that, like, get let out of prison in 2021, and we might try and study, like, okay, look, what are all these? If we see 100 people that are let out of prison in 2021, what is their situation in 2026? What's their situation in 2031, 2041, etc. Y'all follow me so far?
Yes,
A
sir.
panel study, again, all of these are longitudinal studies, and keep in mind, longitudinal, that we're studying these issues over a longer period of time. A panel study, again, which data is collected from the same set of people, similar to a cohort study, at several points in time. Again, where you might examine the rate in which men of the class of 2019 love these hoes in each month, in November, December, January, March, etc. And comparing these type of longitudinal studies, and we're going to take a break here in just a moment, we can look at something like religious affiliation. So we see for, in 2021, for example, Nashaya, that people are less religious today than they were 20 years ago and certainly 50 years ago. We can examine this changing phenomena in many different ways. We can look at trend studies. Again, trend studies where you study a given characteristic, and we look at, like, okay, it's a simple question. What was the level of people's religiosity in 1970 compared to 2020? We might look at cohorts that we may look at people that were going to church in 1970, and we might check in and see their church attendance in 1980 and 1990, the same group of people. Then a panel study just follows the shifts in religious affiliation amongst a more specific group of people over time, not just people within the cohort per se. A couple more points before we again break. Again, you all are beginning to set up your own research. And maybe a little bit over a month, you're going to have to do a research proposal. In doing your research proposal, you want to be very mindful about the components that you're going to have in it. Not all of these will be steps that you'll need to put in there. So the first couple, again, you've done already. And looking at the purpose of your research project and what you're trying to find out. Specifying the meaning of the concepts. Again, some of that we still have to do. I hope, again, you all will reach out to, like, schedule office hours. So we need to specify, what do we mean by educational attainment? We had to specify, what do we mean by low income? We had to specify, what do we mean by abuse? So we want to be very clear on that. So we had to be specific to these here. Did we mean physical abuse or all abuse? So in that case, we meant physical abuse. We got to select a research method. I'm going to give y'all a hint. And again, it's an advantage of coming to class. Is that your research method is going to be content analysis by and large. Secondary content analysis, secondary content analysis, secondary content analysis, secondary content analysis. This is mainly because in the interest of time, that Nashaya, like, as we'll talk about, trying to, like, do a survey or an experiment or something like that, or even field research, it could be kind of time consuming at this time. Now, what I might recommend, Dave, is that you, again, do this secondary data analysis here. And then when you get to grad school, you can, like, set it up as an experiment or something like that. I got you. 1 second, Janai. You want to determine how you're going to measure your results. Again, this is the most important thing. Like, so in this way, what patterns are you going to look for to, see if your hypothesis is proven or not? We'll talk about this once we really get into the methods section, beginning later today and definitely on Thursday next week. Determine whom or what to study. Do you want to study all single parents? Do you want to study male and female single parents? Do you only want to study Black parents? Do you only want to study people under 25? Once you start doing a secondary data analysis, Janai, and hopefully some of that is already ongoing, That's where you're going to get your empirical data. That's what's going to give you your empirical data. The main thing you're going to have to do over the next month is collect this empirical data and begin to process this data. None of this, though, you'll have to do by yourself. And then at the end of the class, you're going to report your findings. Let me get into the chat real quick. So you're, I'm assuming you're meaning method. Yes, you can absolutely use more than one method. And in fact, most research, again, once you get more advanced with it, use more than one method. Almost every, the sources, so be also mindful of the sources, the methods that your sources are using, and that'll give you some clues there as well, how to approach it in your research. Most of them are going to be using more than one. We're going to get bumped out in a moment. Let's log back in at 2 o'clock sharp using the exact same link. Log back in at 2 o'clock. I'll see you all at that time. Review your notes in this chapter before we resume.